thought one thing that was worth mentioning is, given that we've had a change of monarch.
Oh, monarch.
Yes. We've got, where is it now? Two chapters from the New Testament that are relevant. Just make sure I find them. Okay. Okay, right. So, first letter of Peter, chapter 2. No. It's chapter 2, verse. Yep. Chapter 2, verse 13. So we have this question of, like, we've got a king now. We had a queen before. So should we give them any obedience? Because they're not elected, their power is inherited, and we have an elected House of Commons. So here's what St. Peter says. First letter, chapter 2, verse 13. Be subject, for the Lord's sake, to every human institution, whether it be the emperor as supreme, or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to praise those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing right you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. Live as free men, yet without using your freedom as a pretext for evil, but live as servants of God. Honour all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, honour the emperor. So you know that in the old days the Queen was the Empress of India. So we had empresses in India, and our kings and queens were empresses and emperors. So we are to honour the emperor. And so that means that, as St. Peter first says when I began this quote, be subject to every human institution, whether it be the emperor or governors. We must do that, but we go further than that. We must honour the emperor. So we have to give affection to the king or the queen, according to St. Peter. And then, in Romans, St. Paul speaks, chapter 13, verse 1. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. So we therefore see that our kings, our prime ministers, our parliaments are instituted by God. Men think that they've established this, but this is God who's established it, because it's like human beings need to know how to make fire. They need to know how to make ships, boats. They need to know basic things. And one can say from the Old Testament that God taught man to do certain things, certain essential things. So for example, if God had not taught man, Adam, how to make fire, then man would have died. And if certain ways of eating plants had not been taught, or growing plants had not been taught to Adam by God, man would have starved. So basic things are there by God, and they're the essentials for man. Now man needs institutions to govern him when he's in groups. So when you get to the level of the tribe, you need a tribal leader. When you get to the highest form, the nation, the state, then you need even more sophisticated forms of government. So it was only in ancient Israel that God was going to govern Israel by himself, and the tribes would form a confederation, and they would have no man as king, but they wanted a king, so God gave them Saul, and then Saul was replaced by David. But for all the other nations, and that would include the early Britons and the early inhabitants of Gaul and the Germanic regions. They would have kings. Paul goes on to say, this is my argument against revolution. It says, therefore, he who resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. So that means every revolution is against God's will. Even if the king is a tyrant, we must not seek to overthrow him. According to St. Paul, for those who resist, because the emperors were not good men, yet St. Paul is saying to resist them is to resist what God has appointed. So if we resist the emperors, and that's against God's will, then resisting any other authority is against God's will. So what's the answer? Well, the answer for Christians is the power of praying. God will deal with tyrants, not immediately, because it's a Christian's duty to suffer, but God will in the end deal with tyrants. That's how he dealt with the unfaithfulness of ancient Israel's leaders, by bringing pagans to destroy them. That's how he dealt with Adolf Hitler. He brought the Allies to destroy him. But there was no use in the German people trying to overthrow this man. It was a failure. Efforts were von Stauffenberg's efforts failed. But God always has a way of bringing down a tyrant, but we are not to do it ourselves. We are simply, so for example, the British declared war on Germany because Germany was given an ultimatum and it broke that ultimatum, the invasion of Poland. But it wasn't that Britain just chose to declare war on Germany for no reason, but Germany went too far. And that's how what tyrants do. And eventually, events bring them down. And that's the hand of God operating.